He said, if you go back to the city, you're going to lose your life. You got a choice to make now. You could stay here and pursue that Division III school thing, or you can go back to the streets. And I went back to the streets. I went back to Hell's Kitchen. There was just this draw, not just the drugs, but the streets were pulling me. My name is Hector Vega. Hear my story. Yeah, I grew up in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, which is right around the Times Square area. When I was growing up in that neighborhood, it was very chaotic, a lot of street games, a lot of convicts, prostitutes, drug addicts, pimps, you name it, drugs everywhere. You know, my family life at that point started to get hard because there was a lot of joblessness, unemployment, if you remember back in those days, and inflation was running high, gas shortages. And I remember my dad, you know, he no longer had the job as a taxi driver, and so he had to make ends meet. And that started to become part of our family environment, if you will. So I would have people come knock on the door in the house. There was a little peephole that we used to move to the side, and it was wide open, and they would slide the money through the door, and then you would give them the drugs on the other side, you know? So I started to like the fact that the money was coming through the peephole, and I would start stealing the money. You know, I would take the money, jump out the window, you know, get $300 pushed through the hole, you know, go hang out with the guys on the corner and, you know, start dabbling with stuff like that. And so that's how things started. When I was younger, when I was 15, I got arrested by a federal task force that came into the Midtown neighborhood called Operation Pressure Point. And I went through the system, and I ended up going to federal court. So now we were being charged under federal statutes. And they gave me an option to go to this school called Glen Mills Schools in Pennsylvania. And when I went back there, I started going back to school. I got my GED and got scouted playing baseball for the school team, and started representing the state of Pennsylvania in the Babe Ruth League and regional championships and all that. So I was offered an opportunity to come back to play in a Division III school after I did my time. And I went home on what they call a home pass. And it was a 3-day pass to go home and, you know, before you get released, go home and kind of see your family and all that. And I went home and I started getting high. For 2 days straight, I just, you know, you got 48 hours before you go back to jail, right? That's the way I was viewing it. And I just did everything I could in those 48 hours. And I remember a memory, I could never forget this. My mom and my dad bumped into me at the corner store on 47th Street and 9th Avenue. And the pain that I saw in their faces, especially my mom, because they saw that I was high, they saw my eyes were dilated. And I just looked at them and I was like, don't worry, I'm going back, you know, I'm leaving tomorrow. And I left. I went back to the jail, turned myself in. My coach ripped me. You know, what's wrong with you? You look like crap and all of this other stuff. And he said, if you go back to the city, you're going to lose your life. You got a choice to make now. You could stay here and pursue that Division III school thing, or you can go back to the streets. I went back, and within a month, I had been arrested 2 more times. And within a couple months, I had been sentenced again, and I was off to Rikers Island to do a year of prison time. And I remember being in that jail cell thinking to myself, I wish I could go back to that school and pursue that Division III opportunity, but the door had closed. There was nothing I could do. And toward the end of 1994, I get arrested for the last time. And I remember sitting in the car and thinking to myself, somehow this is gonna work out to be like my rescue. That was it. I went back to jail, went back to Rikers Island, and I have this dream that in this dream I am on a fence. It's a piece of a fence, it's floating, and I'm standing on it, and there are people walking underneath me. There are 3 guys that have wolves on leashes like dogs, and the wolves are trying to get me up the fence. And I was just saying, Jesus, help me. If I fall, they're gonna kill me. And all of a sudden, my dream changes, and I'm in my mother's house. There is a wooden pulpit with a Bible open, and I'm standing behind it, and there are people sitting in my room waiting for me to speak. And I wake up and I'm thinking to myself, this is strange and weird. And I just knew the dream had some significance, but I didn't understand it. So I got on my knees. At this point, it's hard because I'm thinking God doesn't want anything to do with me. I already turned my back on him. And I get on my knees and I'm just asking God to share with me, what is this? What does this dream mean? And I remember hearing a whispered voice in my ear say, Galatians 5. It was as if it was a thought, but it was a whisper. And I went to read it for the first time in the NIV version, and it says, it is for freedom that Christ sets you free. Stand firm, do not let yourself be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. Verse 6 or 7 says, you were running a good race. Who cut in on you and kept you from obeying the truth? And I came home in 1996 and planted myself at Times Square Church. And I said, whenever those doors open, I'm going to be there. And I'm just going to see what God does. And slowly but surely, he began to change my life dramatically. And then 2009, I get called to be a pastor by people in leadership at Times Square. And the first thought I had was, what are they smoking? Because there's no way I'm a pastor. I've never been to seminary. I've never done anything to the sort. I should be getting pastored, not being the pastor. Two things that I've really learned about my journey with God now that's really profound is I have a problem with being vulnerable. I think we all have a problem with shame, fear, and guilt. And so I think we go through most of our lives trying to hide who we really are. And yet God comes in and allows us the love that we need and the acceptance so that we can be all who we want to be, right? And the other thing is that I'm recognizing that there is a love that is so unconditional and so powerful that it can break any stronghold in my life and any problem that I'm facing because God is for me. And so these are two things that I've just really learned and come into in my life now, that I don't have to pretend to be somebody that I'm not. God is really after the real me. And yet we go through life trying to hide the real me. And yet exposing the real me is where victory occurs. If you have messed up and you think to yourself, I've messed up too many times and there's nobody there for me, I've burned too many bridges, just know that God is always there and you could always turn around. As long as you're living and breathing, you could always turn around. That's nothing but a lie that we tell ourselves to continue to excuse and justify what we want to do.